Hello and welcome to Say Hi to the Future, Ingenious Thinkers, a podcast aimed at highlighting the human side of ingenuity. My name is Ken Tencer, curator of Say Hi to the Future, helping leaders think differently in the face of uncertainty and ambiguity. Better thinking, better outcomes. With me today is Dr. Riad Hartani, author of Tech Nomads of the Universe and co-founder of Xona Partners. Dr. Riad Hartani, welcome to Say Hi to the Future.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So Riad, we revel in ingenious thinking here, and I just have to read a little bit about your educational background just so people understand who is the conversation is with today. You received a doctorate in artificial intelligence from the University of Paris and finalized your doctoral and postdoctoral work at the University of California, Berkeley by the age of 25. That is the age that many of us are just thinking about as secondary. So congrats on that. That is truly put you in rarefied air. But I'm mentioning that because education today, as it always seems to be, is an ongoing debate. In an ambiguous world, in an uncertain world, and things in which roles are changing, where do you sit on education if you're talking to an 18 or 20-year-old today?
Yeah, very interesting question, right? I mean, times are changing, but at the same time, frame education as a way to get the tools and the skill sets to do approach the world as you move ahead, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not like a one size fits all. I mean, different things apply to different, people based on what they want, what they've done, and where they're moving towards, right? At the same time, I think it's probably key. You see that there are multiple stages, but there's a stage where basically you have to get, what one would think are the basics to basically have what it takes to look forward, right? And then once you get that, you jump into, okay, so what do I want to do out of all that, and where is my niche really, right? And then you tailor your education based on that. And what's sort of maybe different today compared to 20, 30 years ago, I think there are sort of more choices and probably more ways of picking what you want out of all the choices out there. So that's the formula that one, has to go with. But again, it's an art, right? It's not really, sort of like something you apply and you win with it.
And do you find, I mean, because look, artificial intelligence, you're coming at it from a certain perspective. A lot of people talk about the skills of, say, industrial design, where you are learning to see and to hear and to appreciate the changes around you. I mean, are those some of the skills that everybody should integrate into whatever degree they are today?
Yeah, so yeah, if you look at AI, but it's broader than just AI. It applies to a lot of the new things going on at the moment, right? I think that mix of your I would say hardcore education where you learn things in school and all of that. You have to basically complete it or complement it in a smart way with what you do hands-on. Basically, you learn on the spot, right? And I think it's that combination of the hard skills, soft skills, that's probably the most important as you move forward, in your work life, innovation life, and whatever you do after that, right? That's the right balance: hard skills, soft skills, and within that, the capacity to adapt is fundamentally important moving forward.
And what attracted you to artificial intelligence? Because again, I'm not dating anybody, but you're a little older than 25 today. You're at the forefront of this movement. What brought you there?
Yeah, it was the very early days of AI. What brought me there? A good question. I think I grew up in Algiers, right, in North Africa, and like in the 70s, and those days, like probably everywhere else, as kids, you watch all these animations, right? Those days we were very much, into like animations, like from Japan, and Japan was all about robots and and things like that, right? And I mean, quickly, I get into this whole mood of okay, I mean, how can this intelligent machines, intelligent robots like do things, and so that's sort of like the first link with AI for me at least, right? Yeah, and you see, I took that. So it was in the subconscious, really, right? So you went through like, education. I did a lot of like math and physics and, in this industrial engineering during like, my engineering schools. And then, by the time I finished that, the whole notion of AI and building these intelligent machines and figuring out how intelligence works came back in the forefront. And that got me to like jumping into AI in the early days. I got a lot of stories on AI, right? And from those days all the way till today, I've seen basically, the ups and downs, the booms and busts, and still seeing them now, right?
So what are some of the positive things you've seen about AI or its development or its potential in the world?
What's interesting about AI is, and that's an old joke we had, like, in the days where I was doing my PhDs. I was between like, US, France, and Japan during my PhD days, right? As long as things don't work, we call them AI. Once they work, we call them something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you take that formula, so a lot of the things that were considered AI, then they evolve and they become like a discipline in itself, right? Things about like speech recognition, vision, robotics, many other things, right? And it's interesting because there is a lot more AI or AI-like or what was called AI in things we've been using every day for the last 20, 25 years. So it's not like a new thing, so from that perspective, I see a lot of the value that, AI brought to the, to our lives, right, in multiple fields. We just don't like see it maybe, but it's there, right? So lots of benefits there for sure. And I see the same, like, as we progress, like, down the, what we're doing in the AI field at the moment.
So I have to ask you this because this is about human ingenuity. It's high. Where's the balance? What's like, to me, there's a level of augmentation we're going to see, but how do you see human intelligence and artificial intelligence and working together?
You should see AI as basically a tool out of many other tools to solve problems, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see, I sort of like trained as an engineer, so it's basically like, taking problems and solving them. So it's a tool. And, like many other tools and many other things that came up, like, in science and so on, it all depends on how you use it, right? So my take is to see from that perspective, like, it gives you capabilities, but at the same time, you have to figure out, what the right thing to do with it. What are the boundaries? Like things that we're seeing today popping up in the whole, language models and Gen AI, things like, ethics and bias and, and is it the right data or not the right data? Am I using the right way? This been there, as one was doing AI for the last 10, 15, 20 years, right? It's always been the same problem. Maybe what makes it different today is, I think for the first time, probably ever, there were blips like, in the late 90s about like AI getting to consumers and so on at scale, right? Especially in Asia. But it's the first time probably where AI is sort of like, is there in the face of like, mass markets, right? At scale. Right. And that's what makes the same problem seen, perceived, and approached differently today, right? When we talk, is AI, a problem? Can it cause like, issues? It was the same problem before, but now, like, like everyone is asking the same question. So the way to approach this question is very different, right? So I think that's sort of what I see as fundamentally different, is really, the fact that it's in basically in the hands of like, mass markets, large corporations at scale, and global as well, which is an interesting dimension. Hence, one sort of like touches the problems way more than they were like in the past, right? But at the same time, we've had the same problem with other technologies that came up, like, in the past. So yeah, it's all that balance, as you say, right? I mean, what is the balance? Good question.
Is artificial intelligence actually intelligent? And I ask it because for me, the moral and ethical filter is part of the intelligence equation. So is that in there, or is it just a really good algorithm? And sorry, that's a layperson's
It's again, well, I mean, I think the first question, like, what is intelligence? And it's not like there's one answer to intelligence. If I
Yeah.
go back, my thesis in AI was probably one of the first PhD theses combining what I would call symbolic AI, basically logic. I
Yeah.
mean, different types of logics, right? I mean, Boolean, fuzzy, all of that. With numerical AI, basically AI with data, right? Which is approximation of functions in most cases, with neural networks and all of that, right? So if you take that, and I'm sort of like, going back in time here, it was part of the whole story of what is intelligence, right? Is it like, you try to mimic what the human being do with rules and logic and, and infer and, deduct and induct and all of that? Or is it just like you take like basically snapshots, basically data, and you learn through that, and then maybe you reinforce that through reinforcement learning, or you discover via unsupervised learning. So you see the notion of like what is intelligence, I think there are multiple answers. Within the AI field, you have like multiple techniques and approaches to mimic some of that, right? When we were doing the first neural networks, I remember I was doing like, training neural networks like in 95, 96. Those days was like just trying to understand the brain, the neurons and the synapses and how they work, and then I approximate that. So it's all about, to answer your question, you would take intelligence, you will define it differently, in the past and today, and then the AI techniques will be ways of mimicking that and approaching that, via multiple like, ways of doing it, right? And we're still there today. I mean, even if AI today is more synonymous with like, large, scale data and taking that to basically learn. But this is one approach out of many, right? It's not the only approach. Other approaches work. And my take is, and I think that's what I see happening over the next 5-10 years. For each one of the approaches we take within AI, we are hitting, or we're going to be hitting, some roadblocks, either in terms of cost or performance, or even like in related things like, energy, like usage and all of that. So those limitations will force you to basically use other techniques or combine techniques to basically get to, at the end of the day, basically solving problems, right?
Right.
Using AI. And again, it's never just AI, right? It's always like, I have a problem, and AI will be a tool set, that I will leverage to get to a solution.
So Riad, your book, Tech Nomads of the Universe. And there's a descriptor here that really intrigued me. Collection of interview-driven essays highlighting a journey through regions and through time, canvassing the cultural, historical, geographical, and government forces that drive technology innovation around the world. I'll tell you what really fascinates me, and please pick up on any part of that you want. Cultural and historical. You're speaking to, is it discovery, adoption, time? What are you speaking to here? Because it's a lot different than just let's create this tool and bring it out in a homogeneous type of way.
Yeah. Back to the book, right? Basically, I wrote most of it during the COVID lockdown, right? So it's a good time to reflect. And but really, like when I looked at this book, basically go back to my sort of like, life. I had sort of like 3 lives, post education, I would say. One was pure like, research, out of my PhD and postdocs in multiple research labs, like, in US, Japan, Korea, many others. The second was primarily building companies like startups. Pretty much all of it in the Silicon Valley, like it's done like, so hardcore startups and the whole, process of like building, raising, scaling, deploying. And the third one was mostly working with global investors, which is now an advisory on building new businesses, right, at scale all over the world. So within this, it gave me the chance to, especially when I was building my startup, is taking something built in California and then taking it global, to multiple parts of the world and deploying it at scale, right? So that brought me to travel a lot. I used to travel quite a bit, even like, before that, but within that, I traveled all over the place. It's well over 100 countries, like, hundreds of cities, many times. And it gave me a chance to live in multiple societies, right? Like Africa, in Asia, in Europe, in America, and all of that, right? And then what sort of like, the question that was on the back of my mind is, wherever you go, I mean, in each society, they will talk about innovation and doing something like, creative and new. But at the same time, the definition of innovation, the way of doing it, the way of approaching it was very different. I mean, the way you look at it, like, in Japan or in the US or in France or in or in India or whatever, like, they're always very different. So for me, that was the main thesis, is like, when you try to, have a society, like, basically build these like tech ecosystems and put startups together and take risk, to build new businesses together, how are they really approaching it? So then I said, okay, let me study this. So yeah, so I went back to a lot of the friends and colleagues and partners from previous life that I've done businesses with. A lot of them were spread out around the world, like after having done mostly their startups and so on. And then, what, I'm gonna go and travel to a lot of these places. First, meet my friends. So a story about friendships, that lasted like, decades. Second, it's basically a story about understanding the linkages between what you see in a specific society, like basically the history behind it, the geography behind it, the experiences they've gone through, like over the last 1,000 years, right? And linking that in terms of how their people basically go and build new things, how they take risks. And then third was really to take that and synthesize it in a way, that will get you to the final story, which is there is no one way to doing things, right? For example, this whole story of you have to build startups to have an innovative society, maybe it's true in some societies because they, their history, like, calls them towards that. But in others, maybe not. Maybe it's big companies doing it. Maybe you're an entrepreneur within. Maybe see. So I think that thesis of linking, how you innovate to your background, to where you live, to the societies where you develop, it's very strong, right? And yeah, so that was the essence of the thesis. Then of course it gets you into other things. Is like what got sideways from this book was trying to study like some of these like concentrated ecosystem of innovations over the last couple of thousand years, right? You probably have like 20-30 regions, cities of the world that went through that, like in Greece, in Andalusia, in the Middle East, and then when I look at those things, and you basically change the time from 2020 to, let's say, 1020, it's gonna be the same things, right? Different parts of the world do different things based on their own like basically anchor. So the history, the geography, the culture are inherently very tied up to how you innovate today. And I think this is important moving forward, because like technology is becoming fundamental with the whole digital world. It's always been fundamental, but probably now we see it and see it at scale. So you see all these issues pop up of geopolitics and and tech diplomacy and and I think all of that can work way better if of all these like countries and society understand each other's better by going back into times and history. So that was the thesis and the essence of the book. Yeah.
So when you talk about that and you talk about connectivity and going back in time, what I think about today is that we're so interlinked, and larger companies especially are going to be bringing different histories, different cultures to a common innovation room, and it doesn't always work well.
Absolutely. And yeah.
Talk to me about how you make those speak to one another, maybe a little more happily.
That's basically the challenge we're having now. You see, I don't think it's unique to this age. Of course, I mean the internet and information anywhere, anytime to everyone, sort of like changes the equation. But over, if you look like, back in time, you've had periods where you have like large corporations basically owning most of the business and dictating most of what needs to be done. And they were very much tied up to like, to the countries where they, originated and all of that. Yeah, so we've seen those situations. Yes, today, it's definitely something that we're facing. How do you make the whole thing work? For me, that's going to be like you're a chef, like, in the kitchen, right? And you have all these ingredients and you have all these views and I think it's all about understanding like the vis-a-vis, right? When you deal with what to do and what to build here, right? And figuring out based on that, and and seeing things from their perspective and their goals and their rules, have way more flexibility in letting things adapt, right? And letting the people that are supposed to be best at adapting it to do it as well. We have some of that in the whole open source community, where I'm quite involved as well. On the software side, for example, yeah, you get things up and like people will take it and do whatever they want and make sense for them. I think I think it's back to being able to adapt, being able to be flexible, and be able to understand like the vis-a-vis, right? I mean, those are three angles in the triangle here.
And what role do you think AI has in overcoming some of those cultural barriers? I mean, is it working with a much richer, more diverse information set that helps level set, or like where do we come from with this?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to AI, that's another challenge, right? Because, and that's sort of a challenge we've seen over the last 20, 30 years, right? I mean, typically we say, okay, we have this internet, so everything that's basically is accessible to everyone. So, you would assume that things will go more spread out and access, basically by others for whatever is needed. But in reality, the economics made it work such that you have a concentration of knowledge, especially at business level, at company level. If you look at the market cap of largest companies, the top 10 would be way sort of sort of overweight compared to the others, right? So we've had a sort of I would say not the opposite effect, what was expected, but you had concentration of of things, in terms of technology and so on. In the AI world, I think I make a lot of parallels between the AI and the internet. A lot of my startups are building the internet really, but I had an AI background. Look at the AI today, it's the same thing, right? I mean, the assumption is that AI is in the heads of everyone. Yeah, you can build large language models in any country you want, with any, language you want. You can, in theory, but very quickly the economics come at play, right? What's the cost of doing that? Who has the expertise of doing that at scale for a long time, and who has the money basically to do that as well, because these things are very, very expensive. So I think that's where I think one would have to strike a balance, right? We're hoping that all this internet and AI and, it's sort of like a way to spread knowledge and giving a chance to a lot more people to build, in different societies and so on. But, the economics, the funds behind the knowledge required to get that done behind, has to also basically follow, as you fall back in the trap, or basically you end up with a concentration of things in the hands of few large corporations, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So Dr. Riad Hartani, we've been speaking on Say Hi to the Future. It's amazing how quickly time flies. I do want to ask you one last question though, and it goes to Xona Partners, is that right? Is sort of a close here today, and specifically your capabilities pyramid, because I found that quite a unique approach, or a way to think through challenges today.
Yeah, so Xona, again, after my startup life, the hardcore build startups, for 15 plus years or so, and I've been observing other peers and partners doing the same in their own worlds, right? So the idea was to sort of put a set of people with this startup high risk innovation type credentials, and we created Xona Partners with the goal of basically changing, or at least addressing how advisory work, how investment works at scale, bringing in this shared risk, shared return methodology, right? So if you look, the approach we've been taking, say, okay, we keep this innovation DNA that we've had from the startup life, Silicon Valley primarily. We keep this notion of staying at the edge of technology and whatever happens next, but we take it, to different audiences, large corporations, governments, so I think that's the ingredient for the Xona, is really basically handling you know, investments at scale, acquisitions at scale, innovation within corporations at scale, with a totally different approach, right? Sitting on our background, right? So that's where we're at, you know, at the moment, and yeah, and moving forward with it.
In your capabilities pyramid, can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, capabilities, like, you know, it's basically it's a 360 around anything digital, internet, you know, AI. But you go from the bottom up, like, you know, chips all the way to clouds to basically AI and whatever is using that, right? With a very strong you know, sort of like you know, linkage to anything connectivity, basically, like, you know, submarines, satellites, terrestrial, you know, because we believe that, you know, connectivity has been key for the last, like, you know, few thousand years. It's still key today, still evolving, and that's the glue between all these human beings, and, you know, being able to communicate. So we sit on a very deep knowledge of anything connectivity, and basically frame whatever is around it, you know, on anything like compute, you know, like in AI, data, and so on. So that's the thesis, really. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Riad. It's been a whirlwind, and it's been a pleasure. So Dr. Riad Hartani, Xona Partners and Tech Nomads of the Universe, your latest book. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Very much appreciated.
Take care.
Bye.